Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are warned that the following program contains images and voices of deceased persons.
He was an amazing figure. He was a tall man, hence the nickname Lofty, and yet he was so humble and self-effacing.
An award in the Order of Australia.
He's explained all the stories to me. I've got my understanding of it, and yeah, now I can pass it on to more people, not just my family, but to others around me.
The unique thing about his art practice, when you just look at it in the pure sense of art, in terms of art history, is the very long, unbroken timeline of which that painting tradition comes from.
I think there's a lot of ways to look at his legacy or what he represents, but for me, his art and the visual representation of his knowledge through his art has given us a very almost direct link to another belief system which was incredibly ingrained in him, and it was just his life, to another time, a place, a country that perhaps the wider community has lost.
He was a ceremony man, and also he was a man that he grew up in those areas, Plateau country. He walked along with his own family, especially his parents. And that's where I think he started to do a little bit of artwork on the rock.
The West Arnhem Land Plateau is spectacular country. The late afternoon sun on the sandstone cliffs and so on, painting them all these different colours. As well as that, there's just such incredible depth of human engagement with the landscape and travelling around, and just almost every time you go to a new place, there's a painting that someone's left, you know, that tells a story. You know, maybe it's a story of 50 years ago, you know, but sometimes it's 500, sometimes 5,000, you know, possibly even 50,000. They're like messages in a bottle, you know, they've just been left so long ago, and yet they speak to you so directly, even today.
Old Wamud, cup of tea, I remember when we used to boil cup of tea for him, make lunch, with dinner. This is the place for me, under Pongolpi. Our man used to telling us story when we were doing painting, sitting down with him, doing painting, telling us story, the dream time story, with the painting. Sometimes, like, we used to help him to do paint. And knowledge kumanuan at pere. He was giving us knowledge. Basically, showing us doing painting. we got learned. Myself and Yaurin, Ray, Ellen, Mary, and Maud used to paint Gandhi.
We sat beside him, like watching each day, doing drawings, and then start putting up patterns, you know. And that's how I learned a little bit from him.
Sometimes, like kangaroo, like Marcha Manu, like singing by me, Janyam Naga, red kangaroo now, red.
Different kind of songs they used to sing.
Oh, I'm singing all men all the time. And the boy, Minyan when Magnale, on a short story, Maka like Manu, you would be Manuel.
The thing you'd have to say about Bardayal was that he was probably one of the most gifted artists working in the Western Arnhem Land figurative tradition, because his capacity to render the naturalism of his subjects and his incredible eye for detail, in my opinion, was unsurpassed. And in many respects, he was a classicist, because all of his work always referenced his rock art origins. And you have to remember that he grew up in the really remote part of the rock country, in the upper reaches of the Liverpool River, at a time when there was no influence from Western society in that particular area. And he actually recalls he was a teenager before he met his first white people. And he, in his senior years, was actually the last senior man who was a rock art painter.
Grandpa did when he was a teenager. But this picture, they seen first time in their Palanda. Used to travel around with horse.
He described to me he was painting in the rock art way, and I paint that Mimi way. Now, the Mimi spirits are original ancestral beings. Now, they're believed to be the first beings to have painted on the rock art and then taught the Nayuyungi, the first people, how to paint. So when he says I paint Mimi way, he's saying I paint from that way, from the beginning, from the rock art style, and he would never have compromised that.
Because the cross-hatching was actually derived from sacred body paintings, he just didn't feel it was ethical. So he was always distinguished by that very fine line work. There's one particular waterhole site where the honey log is submerged in the water where it resides with the rainbow serpent. It's a very, very sacred area. And the way Bardayal depicted the rainbow serpent was actually quite characteristic of his style. And it's depicted with the body parts of a whole range of different plants and animals. For example, it's got the tail of a fish, it's got the breastplate of an emu, it's got the head of a crocodile, and on its back it's sprouting water lilies. And in a way, what he was trying to express through that was the transformational power of the rainbow serpent, because it's believed to be the mother of all creatures. He also painted a number of the honey spirits from the country, and there's a lot of different spirits that are associated with different species of honey. One of the iconic spirit beings that he paints quite a lot, which is associated with Unkunjung, is the Wakiwakan spirit that lives in the rock, and it doesn't have any legs. And he also used to paint more universal themes like Mimi spirits, the Yauk Yauk mermaid, as well as a whole range of different animals and plants.
Because he was a rock art practitioner, so his works, you see the spirit people quite often in dynamic pose. You know, they may be hunting an animal, or they may be dancing, or they may be even just the interaction between. There's a couple of great paintings here of, I guess, meetings between the first people and creator spirit people, and you can see the interaction, the head movement, and even that has an amazing dynamism in it.
You see the development of his art practice from 1969, which was the year that he acknowledged Peter Carroll, who was a missionary who travelled to Gumbalanya at the time, encouraging him to paint for the Western art audience with works on bark and on paper and also print media. From those very early works, you know, the images almost sort of shimmering on the surface of these bark paintings, to the development of that into working on paper, and later in his life in print media, from, you know, etchings and lino prints. And I suppose you get a real understanding of the evolving nature of his professional practice. I suppose just get a real appreciation and understanding of, you know, the uniqueness of his life, his art practice, and his painting school that he's passed on to younger generations of his family who have sort of sat at his feet and have watched him paint and have learnt those stories that have been passed on to them, and that they are fortunately been able to recreate within the context of the show with the commissioned wall painting.
Me and my cousins have got that in our, like, it's now passed on to us, and now we're passing it on to the Ballanda world, and hopefully we'll continue passing our knowledge that he's passed on to us, so at least people have a better understanding in our way.
Ay, no man migan like grandson no ye. Pare don't dengi ban mani mi ma urut ngandi bitna. Alar pun. Alar pun red kul minyamet. Bim. Alar pun ni ban mani mi ma ni. Punga yang angu juare men man help ngandi me manege ngoda wan ngut bere job ngut duruk miri. O all ngai meran. Jam damo might be jam damo I finish. What all lot manajal forever and never we got it.
He was a man who shared. He shared with his own people, he shared with his family, he was generous to a fault, and he shared cross-culturally. So there was this kind of internal contradiction between this man who was in some ways very conservative and in other ways quite sort of radical in his approach to engagement with the wider world. And that was another one of the things that made him so very special.
He likes to let the spirits know who's on the land and who they are, kind of introduce them to them, and so then at least they don't get offended. And sometimes spirits do get offended, and big storms come and kind of scare us a bit. My grandfather's country is up on the Stone Plateau. It's a very spiritual place. So the minute you land, you just feel you just feel all these spirits just welcoming you, and they're very curious and like to see who you are and kind of get the feeling that you're not a stranger in their land.
I first met Wamud in the 1970s when I'd been working out of Manangruda with people there who were leaving the government settlement and going back to re-establish themselves on their own lands in outstations. And Wamud at this stage, after wide travels in